No peace.
Inaction has made this horror completely predictable.
To again send our thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers.
Well. What do we have here but a new episode of the Equity Matters podcast hosted by Dr. James Bell III, where we champion equity in every conversation. I had to be timely on this one. There's been a few episodes that I've wanted to release, some ideas that I had that I want to see through. I've got a few other things kind of waiting, but right now, the conversation that we need to have is about political violence. Because I think people, one, don't really understand what it means, how it shows up, and also how people get to dictate how we respond to said political violence. Society selects who gets to mourn and also who is worthy of being mourned. And so when violence touches some communities, it literally fills the news. There's no way to get around it. It is in every headline. It's on every notification. But for others, it's barely a whisper. Like no one knows what's going on. So really quickly, just for the sake of anchoring our conversation, I think about political violence, at least we have to define it, right? Like we can't sugarcoat what it means or our reaction to it without knowing exactly what the definition is. And so political violence to me is the use of force. It is intimidation or threats in order to achieve political goals, to influence government actions, or to suppress communities and movements. Now that third part is really important because you think about what it means to be in power, to have power, and the ability to suppress. So the ability to minimize what could potentially be progress. Now, a few key characteristics about political violence that we have to also take into consideration is it is purpose driven. This is not ordinary violence. This is explicitly tied to political power, ideology, and identity. And typically your targets are political leaders, activists, symbolic figures, or sometimes entire communities can be seen as a threat. And the last thing, as far as like key characteristic, it goes beyond the individual. It literally sends a message to a group or to a movement of this could be you. You don't belong. Your power is dangerous. And so political violence is never just about the single act. It's about whose lives are treated as politically valuable, whose loss destabilizes systems, and whose death is seen as disposable. I want you to ask yourself, like, whose suffering counts as an attack on democracy and whose does not? And I'm not even like a political person to this degree, but there's no way that we can have this conversation without acknowledging power and acknowledging even grief in this case. And political violence is typically used as a tool to maintain power structures. And so when you see people grieving over white supremacy and white supremacists, that literally goes in to reinforce everything that we're talking about. And we've lost so many key leaders to political violence. You had Medgar Evers in 1963, Fred Hampton in 1969, Malcolm X in 1965. And it's ongoing. These are individuals who have been gone for 60 years. But the losses still ripple through communities and movements. We still think about those losses today. And so this historical violence extends to modern day systemic inequities. I think about our current activists. I think about the people who are out there leading movements and how there are clear inequities and health disparities in the fact that they die younger and younger. They're more likely to be attacked through racial motivations. These contributions and their impacts on communities are lost. And what happens in the way that it's displayed, there is significant difference between the public attention and the media coverage when there are similar tragedies in other communities. So it's like this idea of selective mourning. There's phenomena that certain stories are going to go viral. Some are ignored. Now, I didn't want to see what I saw on Reddit the other night. It was disturbing. I don't typically seek out videos of violence, but this was the first thing to pop up on my thread. And so I did see what occurred. And there's a lot to be said about the power of the tongue and some of the things that this individual mentioned as far as maintaining our Second Amendment rights. And I just don't understand. I don't understand why high profile violence receives national attention versus everyday violence in communities I'm more familiar with. I'm also a little perturbed by something closer to home, as we're in Michigan and we're waiting on a budget to be approved. And our House of Representatives proposed a budget that actually eliminated our Office for Community Violence Intervention. So are guns not the problem? Are people the problem? Like, I don't understand. Like, make it make sense. We have repeated instances of violence that only creates collective trauma that we don't get a chance to even cope with. The best we can do is have community gatherings, that we hold space for these challenges, that we can have our stories be told. And there's just inadequacy to this idea of thoughts and prayers. Because what are thoughts and prayers going to do? Are we going to actually see some type of action, some type of resolve? Are we going to take the time to try to make a difference? There's systemic failures. There's failures within the system. There's uneven law enforcement response. There's a lack of protective measures for certain communities. Some police officers won't even come to certain neighborhoods. And then it goes further beyond that. There's disparities in investigations, the sentencings, the resources, what happens after political violence. I felt like I read an article today where the president said that he was going to ensure that this individual received a Presidential Medal of Freedom. For what? For spewing racist rhetoric? Well, in this case, yes, and that would be worthy of receiving such recognition. But thoughts and prayers, right? Because symbolic action is great. It's easy. I can say thoughts and prayers all day. But to take the time to do something, to actually push forward policies and programs and making sure communities have what they need. Now, that's innovative, unfortunately, at this case. And there's so many other issues that you could pick apart around, like the whole perception of this, how media frames people as heroes and not criminals, or how things can be a tragedy or an incident. And this public perception in many cases goes on to shape our policy and funding priorities. Sure, we could look at data. Sure, we could look at data. But why don't we just take the public opinion and see where that is right now? So many times Black victims, their coverage is minimized. It's forgotten. It becomes a hashtag of say her name, say his name, don't forget, hands up, don't shoot. The list goes on. But what we need right now is change. Thoughts and prayers as a Bible toting, practicing Christian. Thoughts and prayers is insignificant. What is the expression? Faith without works is dead. Yeah, it has to be. There's so much more that we should be doing because we need to hold people accountable. There's power in doing so. There's small tangible actions that we can contribute to broader systemic change. And unfortunately, thoughts and prayers is not it. There's so many different times where, even that wannabe so-called assassination attempt, it was shocking. It was destabilizing. It was an attack on democracy. Whoop-dee-doo, in the words of Jeffrey Williams. But you have similar violence against Black leaders or community members that's minimized or even criminalized. We talk about the language differences. Again, terrorism, assassination, riot, shooting. Each of these convey different things. And so we have to interrogate who gets to set the moral framing of violence. Why is it that Black communities are disproportionately at risk? Why are we constantly the face of repeated violence? Yet the media spectacle is around elite political figures. Think about it. I don't have to tell you. Just think about it. I don't want us to walk away thinking about, or at least I don't want us to walk away with this idea that one death shakes the nation and others just fade into silence and we're not supposed to do anything. I think we have to actually confront how grief, outrage, and even quote unquote justice are distributed unequally across race, power, and ideology. Because in America, mourning is political too. We deserve more and we deserve better. We don't get to justify violence and we don't get to erase the grief in the process. We have to start questioning the nation's conscience and we have to hold everyone accountable. And so when I see folks on my timeline grieving a racist, a white supremacist, what's wrong with you? Oh, we had different ideals, but he spoke for his people. Come on, do better. He spoke for his people? Well, we shouldn't be bonding with his people either. That's the mentality that's going to keep us stuck forever. We have to understand when someone makes a very clear line about who they are and how they show up, that's who they are and how they show up. There is no obligation to go back and forth, to accept differences when the difference is at the risk of my life, at the risk of my rights, my livelihood. No, absolutely not. No. We can't go back and forth. There is no going back and forth when your values don't align with mine in this regard. In the words of Dr. Frederick Ingram, y'all don't hate white supremacy enough for me. There are too many signs that have been delivered to us that extend beyond thoughts and prayers. We're at a place in our history, in our story even, where we have to say thoughts and prayers for the next one. We need action now. I'm going to always jump to policy change because that's just where I live. You've got the data. You've heard the stories. Create policies that are going to make a difference. I think protection shouldn't be reserved just for high profile national leaders. I think there's safety resources that need to be available to community leaders, to organizers. And I don't necessarily think that has to be law enforcement. I think people should have that community safety network. We need stronger enforcement on hate crimes and domestic terrorism. Ooh, there's that word again. Stronger enforcement and consistent definitions. Racially motivated violence is often under-persecuted. It's compared to ideological violence that threatens the political status quo, you're not seeing nothing. And dare I say, gun policy, real gun policy, red flag laws, universal background checks, restrictions on assault weapons, anything that can reduce the likelihood of politically motivated mass attacks. And the same thing that we saw within suicide prevention, we need accountability and transparency as far as media standards go. You need responsible language in the coverage of political violence. So when you turn on Fox, we shouldn't be criminalizing victims and glamorizing perpetrators. And while that's not necessarily policy in the strictest sense, media guidelines, like we said, can shape perception and public pressure. Collect the data. Track the political violence. Track threats against public officials. I know health officers who have literally hid in their bathroom because during COVID, people were upset. But at the same time, violence against marginalized communities right now is fragmented. It's underreported. Of course, with everything, it comes back to this idea of centering equity. We need community investment. You have to address the root causes that make communities vulnerable. Poverty, lack of political representation. When you have states that are trying to redistrict themselves, to draw new lines, to remove political representation, this is what happens. When you have over-policing without protection, this is what happens. We can no longer treat our civics class as just patriotism. Take an honest look at our history. Promote some critical thinking about democracy, race, and power. And we need support. We need support for our families. We need support for survivors. We need support for communities. There should be funding for trauma-informed services, for memorials, for truth-telling initiatives. I've seen the work that the Kellogg Foundation does around truth, racial healing, and reconciliation. There's too much. There's too much that we can be doing that we are ignoring because we make a choice to ignore it. So I ask, what are you going to do different? What are you going to do to make sure that protection and justice aren't rationed by race or by power? I can't, and you shouldn't, let this be the end of this conversation. Because the world is mourning loudly every day. Every day we lose someone that matters to us, someone who's in a position of power that can support, who can advance the things that we believe in. So, what are we going to do different? As always, thanks for tuning in to Equity Matters. Please be sure to subscribe on all of your streaming platforms, whether that's Apple, Spotify. We're also on YouTube. This episode won't be on YouTube because I don't have video, because I was just going off the dome. I didn't have time to set up cameras. But let me know your thoughts. Would love to check in. And as always, Equity Matters.
I don't apologize for thoughts or prayers.